Today, I want to talk to you about pi. Again. While there's a lot of other really great math out there that I hope to teach to you someday, there's a huge pi-related topic that was totally absent from my last video. I wasn't very fair to the skeptics of Pi Day that I mentioned because I blatantly ignored one of their main criticisms about pi. That criticism is about the number tau. So I want to spend a few minutes today talking to you about tau, and in doing so, get into some of the philosophical ideas that underlie mathematics and some of the behind-the-scene things that mathematicians think about in their daily work. But I don't want to get ahead of myself, so let me start by explaining to you what tau is. In the last video, we defined pi as the circumference of a circle with diameter 1, which might seem a little strange because when we're talking about circles, diameters just aren't that important. The main defining characteristic of a circle is its radius. For example, if you're out walking your dog with a 1 meter long leash, and you stand still, where can the dog go? Well, it can travel within this circle. And in this and many other cases, the defining characteristic of a circle is its radius, in this case, the length of the leash. So instead of looking at a circle with diameter 1, let's look at a circle with radius 1, and we can calculate its circumference as about 6.28. This circumference we call tau. Since circles are nice and proportional, it works out that tau is exactly 2 times pi. And everything nice we know about pi also is true about tau, meaning that tau is transcendental. So if all we're doing is multiplying by 2, who really cares? Well, this guy does. His name is Michael Hartle, and he sums up his ideas really nicely in something called the Tau Manifesto. For starters, pi is pretty fundamental in mathematics. It shows up in a lot of important equations. But it turns out that almost every time you see pi, you're actually looking at 2 pi, meaning all of these equations would be so much simpler if we just used tau instead. And the strongest argument is about the bane of all pre-calculus students, something called the unit circle. To sum up briefly, when you're studying trigonometry, you need a nice mathematically consistent way to measure out angles. So what you do is you think about your angles being inscribed in a circle with radius 1, a unit circle, and the measurement you give to the angle is the length of the arc of the circle that angle traces out. Since the circumference of a unit circle is 2 pi, all the way around, that angle is exactly 2 pi. Halfway around is pi, and a quarter of the way around, well, that's half pi. So, pop quiz, what angle is 2/3 pi? Well, a reasonable person might expect it to be 2/3 of the way around the circle, but it's actually not, because remember, pi was halfway around the circle, so 2/3 pi is 2/3 of halfway around the circle, meaning it's 1/3 of the way around the circle, and when you're 4 layers deep into a complex problem, it's really easy to forget this, making it not the best system for measuring out angles. But if we switch our thinking and use tau instead, then the angle all the way around the circle is 1 tau, halfway around the circle is 1/2 tau, a quarter of the way around the circle is 1/4 tau, and 2/3 tau is 2/3 of the way around the circle, exactly where you would expect it to be. When you use tau, the unit circle is so much more elegant, and since both pi and tau are mathematically correct, we want to start thinking about which one is nicer and simpler to understand. Mathematicians tend to think pretty highly of themselves. You may have heard of the scale of purity, where all the scientists are over on the left with their experiments and real-world applications, while the mathematicians are far to the right and kind of above it all, thinking about formal systems and describing the rules that underlie everything. If we're going to be making the rules that people use to communicate and explain math to each other, these rules should be clear, elegant, and easy to understand. In the mathematical community, finding a shorter, more elegant proof is sometimes just as exciting as finding a brand new mathematical result. Why prove something in 500 pages if you can prove it in a few short lines? A famous Hungarian mathematician named Paul Erdős would say that the job of mathematicians is to fill out the book, which is a theoretical book up in heaven with all the most elegant proofs of the most important mathematical results. And if you were ever told in grade school that you must do math in pencil, this is the underlying reason. If you use pen, there'll be a bunch of scratch outs and it won't look nice, where if you use pencil, you can erase all your mistakes and turn in the cleanest and most elegant solution. As a mathematician, I care a lot about elegance, which makes me want to scream, use tau, it's so much better than pi! But I have to admit, there's something that worries me, and that's that one of my students on her first day of working at some fancy physics lab will run into some point of confusion with her colleagues, and after hours and hours of trying to figure out why their data is different, they'll figure out that there's something mathematical at the core of it, and eventually they'll realize that there was a mistake because one of them was using pi and one of them was using tau, and it cascaded and caused this huge problem in their calculation. It's just multiplying by 2, but pi and tau are so fundamental that it wouldn't surprise me if something along the way could get lost in translation. If the job of mathematicians is to make a correct and elegant system of rules that people can use to discuss mathematics, we need to make sure that it's consistent enough so that people will actually be able to understand each other. I've only been teaching introductory calculus for about 2 years, but I already have a huge list of things that I think are fundamentally unclear. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure tau would even cross the top 5. But if I start changing everything and teach my students a fundamentally different version of mathematics in the name of elegance, I risk sacrificing any sort of consistency we have in our mathematical system of rules. Mathematicians tend to have wildly different opinions as to what is the most elegant notation, and if we give every mathematician free range to fundamentally change mathematics in the way that they think is cleanest, we'll approach this dystopian Tower of Babel situation where no real mathematical progress can ever be made because we're so busy trying to parse out what each other mathematician is saying in each of our unique mathematical languages. There are already some notational inconsistencies in our mathematical system, and they're confusing. I definitely don't want to introduce more. For example, there's something called the dihedral group, and without going into any detail, exactly what this number right here means, well, it depends on who you ask. I've spent way more hours than I'd like to admit staring at a paper trying to figure out exactly which dihedral group they were talking about. So my point is, while pi is far from perfect, by adding tau, a second circle constant, we sacrifice consistency, which I think can create a level of confusion far beyond imperfect equations and unclear angle measurements. Wherever you are in your mathematical journey, at some point, you, as a mathematician, need to decide when it's right to give up on perfection and elegance in the name of consistency and simplicity.